Hey guys, tonight we slip on dusty boots, hitch up our trousers, and step into a dry, wind-blown town with a suspiciously squeaky saloon door and tumbleweeds that look like they're out for revenge. You're standing under the blistering sun, boots sinking into cracked earth, watching two cowboys argue over who parked their horse where. You're not from around here, and everybody knows it. That's the first problem. The second? You have absolutely no idea how to survive the Wild West. You're sweating already, and not just because it's 104 degrees in the shade. There's no running water, your hat's too small, and you haven't seen a bathroom in 6 hours. You're carrying one coin in your pocket and a letter from your cousin inviting you to a place called Dead Mule Junction. You're either headed for glory or gone, get buried under a cactus. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into town with a leather satchel slung over your shoulder and the kind of optimism that just screams first to die. The air smells like horses, gun oil, and regret. There's one main street, flanked by warped wooden buildings that look like they've been chewing on dust for decades. A creaky sign reads "Welcome to Perdition Gulch, population 23, maybe." You blink. A child stares at you while holding a chicken. You wave. The chicken blinks back. Your first steps into the Wild West aren't met with applause or adventure, they're met with silence and squinting. Everyone's sizing you up. Probably wondering if you're a criminal, a taxman, or worse, a writer. Historians still argue whether these frontier towns were lawless hellholes or just quiet communities misunderstood by Hollywood. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. Some towns were full of drunk cowboys and daily gunfights. Others? Mostly grain storage and loneliness. You try not to trip on the uneven wooden walkway and head toward the general store, hoping for advice. Or at least something cold to drink. Inside, a man with an astonishing mustache tells you the essentials: water, boots that don't suck, a wide-brimmed hat, and, if you value your life, some kind of weapon. You buy a tin mug and ask about lodging. Back of the saloon, he mutters. If you don't mind the piano player sleepwalking. The hotel is a room above a bar with stained wallpaper and a mattress that seems to be breathing. Your pillow is straw in a bag. You lie down briefly before jumping up again. Something just moved in there. You decide maybe you'll nap later. Somewhere else, outside, you hear the crack of a whip and the bark of orders. A stagecoach has arrived, covered in dust and pulled by 4 exhausted horses. A woman steps off in full Victorian garb, lace, bustle, the whole overboiled kettle, and promptly faints into a water trough. No one flinches. A cowboy calmly takes a swig from his flask and mutters, "City folk." You wander down to the livery stable. A mule glares at you like it knows what you did last summer. The stable boy, about 12 and smoking something definitely not legal by today's standards, offers you a ride. She's meaner than a preacher on payday, but she'll carry you. You pass. By sundown, the saloon comes alive. Piano music clangs through the thin walls. Laughter, yelling, and what may or may not be an interpretive brawl echo down the street. You duck inside for a drink, water, not whiskey. You're not that brave yet. Inside, oil lamps flicker like nervous fireflies. A man with a bullet graze orders beans, a woman with 6 knives sewn into her corset wins a poker hand, and a dog calmly licks a dropped sausage from under a table. It's chaos, but it's cozy chaos. You might survive here. Maybe. The local sidles up beside you, curious. You lost? He asks. You say you're just passing through, maybe looking for work. He laughs. Work? Round here? That means diggin', shootin', or shovelin' what comes out of both ends of a horse. Fun, You nurse your tin cup of warm well water. There's a story in the corner about a man who struck gold and vanished in the hills. Another about a snake that swallowed a hat and never gave it back. A third about a haunted outhouse, which honestly seems believable. You head outside just as the sun sets behind jagged peaks. The sky turns syrupy orange and purple. You sit on a barrel that probably held pickles once, and now holds nothing but spiders and forgotten dreams. It's quiet, finally. Peaceful, even. You watch two bats fight over a moth like it's gourmet. Here, in this moment, you finally get it. The Wild West isn't all gunfights and treasure maps. It's endurance. It's loneliness. It's dirt in places you didn't know existed. And somehow, it's beautiful. You're gonna need a better hat, though. And socks. The ones you're wearing have given up on life. You wake up stiff, itchy, and covered in what you sincerely hope is straw dust. Your pillow has migrated halfway across the room during the night, and a rat is very casually helping itself to a leftover biscuit in your satchel. Good morning, frontier life. You rub your face and sit up slowly, trying not to breathe in too deeply. It smells like whiskey sweat, horse manure, and mystery meat. Outside, a rooster crows with the vocal cords of a lifelong smoker. Inside, your stomach is already grumbling. It's time for breakfast, or whatever counts as that in this dusty corner of nowhere. Downstairs in the saloon, you ask about food. The bartender, who looks like he hasn't slept since the Battle of Gettysburg, points to a pot bubbling ominously over a fire. Beans, he says. You ask, what kind? He says, hot. The Wild West is not exactly a culinary utopia. If you were hoping for sourdough pancakes and sizzling bacon, you'll be very disappointed. Most of your meals out here come in two categories, beans or not beans. Sometimes there's jerky. Sometimes there's stew, which is shorthand for things boiled until they forget what they were. You cautiously spoon some of the bean sludge into your mouth. It's hot, salty, and surprisingly okay. Not great, but it probably won't kill you. At least not quickly. Historians still argue whether frontier folks had bland taste or just terrible resources. The truth is, both. Supplies came in on wagons that rattled for weeks across mountains and mud, so most towns relied on dried goods, local game, and sheer culinary stubbornness. Spices were a luxury. Tomatoes were considered suspicious. And milk? Only if you were brave enough to milk something that didn't bite back. Later that day, you're invited to a community meal, which sounds charming until you see the menu. Squirrel stew, boiled turnips, and something called mock apple pie, made with crackers and vinegar. You chew thoughtfully. It does not taste like apples. As you politely nod through each horrifying bite, you think of home, whatever and wherever that is. A place where bread has texture and food doesn't stare back. But out here, people make do. A woman explains her recipe for cactus jelly, which she insists helps with digestion and snake bites. You don't ask if she means externally or internally. Probably both. You spot a man gnawing on what looks like tree bark. He swears it's chewing gum from nature. You nod. He's missing 3 teeth. Possibly connected. In your attempts to find something fresh, you visit the general store. It smells like dried oats and tobacco. The shelves are lined with flour, beans, cornmeal, more beans, and something labeled essence of beef. You don't ask, you buy a tin of hardtack, a biscuit so solid it could be used to patch a hole in a boat. It clinks when you drop it into your bag. Biting into it feels like chewing sandstone. You soak it in water. It just gets angrier. One French theory you overhear in the store is that cowboys secretly loved French cuisine, when they could get it. A traveling cookbook seller tries to peddle you a book on Parisian sauces, saying, even beans need friends. You don't buy the book, but you admire the optimism. Food preparation, meanwhile, is an adventure. You attempt to cook beans yourself over a fire and almost set your sleeve on fire. A local woman shows you how to make a fry bread out of flour, salt, and whatever oil you can scrape from a tin. You succeed. It tastes like cardboard with a dream, but it's warm, and that's something. You ask about vegetables. People laugh. One man claims he hasn't seen a vegetable in 4 years, and he's never felt better. His eye twitches. You're not convinced. Fresh meat's a gamble, too. You help gut a jackrabbit one evening and nearly faint. The woman doing the slicing doesn't even blink. Better than canned cow, she mutters. Wait, canned cow? Apparently, yes. Called tinned beef, and so salty it could embalm a small dog. And then there's coffee. Black, bitter, and boiled in a pot that probably hasn't been cleaned since the gold rush. You take a sip and feel your soul leave your body briefly. It wakes you up, sure, but also erodes your stomach lining. Still, you find yourself wanting more, not because it tastes good, but because it feels like something familiar. Something civilized. Something warm. There's a popular debate in town over whether the beans are better at the saloon or the boarding house. You try both. They're identical. Turns out, it's the same pot, just carried back and forth. You keep this revelation to yourself. One evening, you're invited to a fancy dinner. You're skeptical. The host wears a cravat and serves dried trout. Something that might have been boiled potatoes, and, for dessert, a slice of sawdust pudding. It tastes like regret. You ask for seconds, because you're starving. You miss butter. You miss fresh fruit. You miss knowing what's in your food. Out here, survival trumps flavor. You learn to chew slowly, politely, and to say even when your taste buds beg for mercy. Still, food becomes part of the rhythm. Beans in the morning, maybe meat at night. Fry bread when you're lucky. Jerky when you're not. You get used to it. You stop noticing the lack of options. Eventually, you even start craving those weirdly spiced pickles from the saloon. You're not thriving, but you're not starving. And in the Wild West, that's basically gourmet. You've officially survived your first full day in the Wild West, which is more than some can say. Now comes the second great challenge, sleeping in the Wild West. You think it'll be simple. You are wrong, it's late. The saloon has emptied out, save for a guy sleeping upright at the piano, snoring like a sawmill. You climb the creaky staircase back to your room, which, in daylight, looked merely rough. By lantern light, it's deeply haunted. The wallpaper is peeling in long, lazy curls. The floorboards yawn with every step, and you're almost certain someone carved "Help Me" into the windowsill, though it could have just been "Hemp Me." Hard to say. You sit gingerly on the straw mattress. It wheezes like an asthmatic donkey. Something crunches under your leg. Probably not a good sign. You lie down anyway, hoping the darkness will hide the shame. For the first 10 minutes, things are fine. Then the scratching starts. At first, it's soft. Then unmistakable. The kind of sound that says, yes, there are things living in here, and no, they are not paying rent. You leap up and rip the blanket off. Nothing. Just a small, dark stain that might be wine or might be blood. Either way, you're suddenly wide awake. Historians still argue whether most frontier inns were truly this unhygienic, or if we just have a bias from pulp novels and dime westerns. But if your current lodging is any indication, at least some of them were pretty disgusting. Clean bedding was a luxury. Pest control was a fantasy. And mattresses were often filled with hay, moss, or recycled stuffing, which you now realize is code for use by 5 other people and a goat, so, you decide, maybe sleep here isn't happening. You grab your boots and head back outside, where the air is cold and the silence is suspicious. The moon is low and orange, like it's judging you. You consider sleeping in the stable. The mule from yesterday is snoring loudly in a corner. You make eye contact. It looks at you with deep, slow-blinking disgust. You get the message. This stall is taken. Option 3, the stagecoach. You find it out back, tilted slightly to one side, but empty and dry. You crawl in, curl up on a bench, and try to relax. The leather seat is cracked and smells like a decade of sweaty cowboys and canned beans, but hey, it's quiet. For a moment, then the wind kicks up. Something howls in the distance. Coyotes? Wolves? Your own stomach? Could be any of the above. You press your hat over your face and try not to think about how many bugs are probably nesting in the cushions. You doze off for about 10 minutes before the stagecoach rocks suddenly, as if someone, or something, has jumped on top. You freeze. You hold your breath. Silence. Then a sharp thump. You slowly peek out the window. Nothing. Just the long shadows of desert sagebrush and a single tumbleweed meandering like it's lost its GPS signal. You climb out of the coach and decide, fine. Maybe just sleep on the ground. You roll out your blanket near the fire pit behind the saloon and settle in. The earth is surprisingly hard, and your spine immediately informs you that this was a mistake. But you stay. Because you're exhausted, and at this point, the rat-infested mattress and the haunted coach both feel like personal attacks. You stare at the stars. They're everywhere, sharp, bright, cold. There's no light pollution out here, so the Milky Way cuts right through the sky like someone spilled glitter in a black hallway. It's almost enough to make you forget that you're sleeping outside, wrapped in a blanket that smells like goat, hoping no snakes decide to snuggle. One quirky fact you learn from a passing rancher the next morning: some cowboys chose to sleep outside, even when they had beds. Said it toughened them. Built character. Cleared the sinuses. You're not sure about all that, but you're pretty sure you just inhaled a beetle. The next night, you try something new. The jail. You're not arrested, per se, but the sheriff, who's maybe 22 years old and very tired, offers the empty cell as a place to crash. Ain't got no criminals this week, he says. Unless you count the guy who stole a pie. You lie on the jail cot, which is made of rope stretched over a wooden frame. Honestly, it's not bad. The rope sags just enough to cradle your back. And the iron bars make you feel oddly safe. You almost drift off before the sheriff's dog howls once, then settles into a rhythmic snore louder than any snoring human you've ever met. Still, it's better than the mattress. Or the stable. Or the ground. Eventually, you start rotating your sleeping spots. Some nights it's the coach. Some nights, jail. Once, behind a stack of hay bales, using your boot as a pillow. It's not comfortable, but your standards are dropping fast. You learn to sleep lightly. One eye half open. One ear twitching at every sound. You wake up with stiff joints, dust in your hair, and sometimes, a small animal curled against your foot. You tell yourself it's just a cat. You don't check. You also learn tricks from locals. Like placing your boots upside down on sticks so scorpions don't crawl in overnight. Or tucking a hot rock into your bedroll to stay warm. Or stuffing your ears with cotton soaked in whiskey, not for health, but to block out the saloon brawls. And yet, somehow, you start to adapt. Sleep still comes in fits and starts, interrupted by owls or coughing miners or the occasional accidental gunfire, but your body adjusts. You stop caring what you're sleeping on. You care more about not waking up with frostbite or fleas. You still miss pillows. Real ones. You even miss the whir of a ceiling fan, or the faint hum of a refrigerator in the next room. But here, the sounds are different: coyotes yipping, wind whispering through cracked wooden walls, the creak of saddle leather. Eventually, one night, you lie down on a pile of old sacks in a barn, wrap your coat around your shoulders, and fall asleep before your head even hits the floor. It's not the best sleep you've ever had, but it's yours. You wake again, rubbing dust from your eyes and wondering how much worse your situation can get. Then you remember, the locals. The people who live here, who've survived this brutal place longer than you've had clean socks. And they don't exactly roll out the welcome mat. You step into the morning light, where a few townsfolk eye you like you just stepped off a flying saucer. Or a tax collector. Worse. A stranger. And in the Wild West, strangers are trouble. Especially the ones who look like they don't know how to handle a gun or ride a horse, two unforgivable sins here. The saloon is the town's heart, and today it's buzzing. Not with warmth or welcome, but with suspicion. You try to smile. That's your first mistake. The barkeep barely glances at you before sliding a cup of black coffee your way, more to get you out of the way than out of kindness. You take a seat next to a grizzled man playing cards. He stares, then grunts. You ask him about work. He replies with a story about a mule that kicked a preacher into next week. You laugh. He doesn't. You learn quickly that everyone here has a story, but few want to share it with newcomers. Around here, a woman says, polishing her knives at the poker table, trust is earned by spit and gunpowder, and lost faster than a dime in a poker game. The locals speak in a blend of dry wit and guarded suspicion. You're a newcomer. Which makes you either a mark or a menace. Sometimes both. One man, a bounty hunter with a hat too big for his head, warns you about town politics, which mostly involves who's owed what whiskey debt and who's willing to shoot over a poker hand. You watch him carefully, his eyes dart like a cat stalking a mouse. You suspect he's hiding more than just debts. There's a woman who runs the boarding house and the local gossip mill. She whispers about a feud between two ranch families that's older than the town itself. No one crosses the line without risking a knife in the back, or worse. You nod along, feeling every story like a nail in your survival coffin. You try to make small talk with a group of cowboys outside. They're friendly enough, but you catch a few sideways glances and half smiles that say, "We're humoring you." One offers you a smoke. You decline, mostly because you don't want to cough like a dying parrot. A child approaches with a stray dog, and for a moment, you think you might find a friend. The dog sniffs your boots and promptly runs off. The kid shrugs and mutters, he doesn't like new folks. You smile weakly. You realize quickly that blending in here means understanding unspoken rules. Don't stare too long. Don't ask too many questions. Don't flash your coin purse. And above all, never, ever mention the sheriff's questionable gambling habits. One curious local tells you the town once tried to ban hats inside the saloon, sparking a brawl so fierce it nearly ended the place. Historians still argue whether that incident was real or just a tall tale invented to scare off tourists. You're betting on tall tale, but you wouldn't be surprised either way. Despite the chilly reception, you try to stay hopeful. There's a rhythm here. A rough dance of suspicion, humor, and grudging respect. Maybe if you keep your head down, work hard, and avoid the outlaw with the bad temper, you might just last a week. At the edge of town, you watch a sunset that sets the sky on fire, an almost poetic backdrop for a place so unforgiving. You think about tomorrow and wonder, will the locals finally let you in? Or will you remain the outsider, the stranger doomed to wander? Either way, you're learning that in the Wild West, people can be your worst enemy. Or your only chance. You wake the next morning with a new goal. You need a horse. Walking through this endless dust bowl is no way to survive, especially when bandits, snakes, and the occasional rabid coyote are just waiting for a slow pedestrian. A horse isn't just transportation, it's your ticket to respect, speed, and maybe even safety. You wander toward the livery stable, where horses are kept and bartered like gold nuggets. The place smells of sweat, hay, and a hint of fear, as if even the animals know the Wild West isn't kind. The stable boy from before is leaning against the fence, still looking suspiciously too young to be smoking, but here, age is a flexible concept. You ask about renting a horse. He squints, sizing you up, then points to a skinny, scruffy animal named Dusty. Dusty looks like he's seen one too many gunfights and lost every time. You mount him anyway, and he immediately tries to eat your hat. You spend the next few hours trying to remember which end the horse is supposed to go forward. You manage to get Dusty trotting without falling off once, which feels like a victory. Locals watch with a mix of amusement and pity. One old rancher chuckles, "Kid, you're about as graceful as a chicken on roller skates." Riding a horse isn't just about balance, though. It's about understanding your new partner. Dusty's ears flick back and forth, his muscles twitch under your hands. And you start to feel the rhythm of his gallop in your bones. You're beginning to understand the silent language between rider and horse, a language made of pressure, patience, and occasional bribes with sugar cubes. Historians still argue whether horses were truly indispensable to cowboys or if that's just a romanticized myth. The truth? Horses made the difference between life and death, but they were also expensive, temperamental, and prone to running away at the worst possible moment. Dusty proves this theory by bolting when a dog barks. You hold on for dear life, which, in hindsight, is excellent practice for every chaotic moment ahead. You spend the afternoon riding the outskirts of town, practicing turns, stops, and the all-important art of looking like you belong. You don't. But Dusty and you make a decent team, if by team, you mean a truce. On your return, you hear stories about local legends who supposedly tamed wild mustangs with nothing but a look and a whip. These stories are half-truths, half-magic, and fully entertaining. The real cowboys had to wrestle horses, patch up wounds, and deal with bucking broncos that could throw a grown man across a canyon. You mentally thank Dusty for being the mild-mannered exception. That evening, you're invited to a roundup, a gathering of ranchers and cowboys to herd cattle before the long night. It's equal parts work and party, with whiskey flowing and stories flying faster than bullets. You're handed a rope and told to keep up. You try. Mostly, you trip. A cowboy next to you laughs, first time's always like that. You ask him how he learned to rope so well. He shrugs. You don't learn, you survive. As night falls, the campfire crackles and shadows dance. You listen to tall tales about outlaws and treasure buried under the sagebrush. One story involves a hidden mine guarded by ghosts. Another about a legendary cowboy who never missed a shot. Except on Tuesdays. You smile, thinking you might actually like this rough-and-tumble life. But there's a warning, too. The roundup is also where rival ranchers settle grudges, sometimes with fists, sometimes with guns. You keep your head down and your rope ready, just in case. By the time you head back to town, Dusty's hooves are muddy, and you're sore in places you didn't know existed. But you feel a little taller, a little more part of this wild, unforgiving world. You might not be a cowboy yet, but you're no longer just a visitor. You're learning to ride the edge. You've learned to ride, eaten questionable food, and survived a night or two with more pests than friends. Now it's time for one of the most iconic, and dangerous, aspects of the Wild West, the gun. You find yourself standing outside the sheriff's office, where a rack of pistols gleams in the afternoon sun. The sheriff, a lean man with eyes like a hawk and a temper that could light a fire, offers to teach you the basics. You ever handled a six-shooter? He asks, raising an eyebrow. You shake your head, trying to hide the fact that the closest you've been to a gun is watching old movies with suspiciously perfect aim and zero recoil. He hands you a Colt revolver, cold and heavy in your palm. The metal feels both foreign and frightening, like holding a tiny, loaded thunderstorm. He shows you how to load the cylinder, cock the hammer, and aim properly. It's not about pulling the trigger fast, he says. It's about making that shot count. You take your stance and fire at a target. The noise is sharp and sudden, like a clap of thunder in a silent room. Your first shot is wild, hitting nowhere near the bullseye. The second is better, the third almost respectable. The sheriff nods, not quite impressed but hopeful. Gunfights are a real concern here. Legends say the average citizen could expect to draw on a rival at least once in their lifetime. Some towns had rules, no shooting on Sundays. Or duels at high noon only, but enforcement was sketchy at best. Historians still argue whether the so-called quick-draw duels were as common or as cinematic as movies suggest. Many believe most gunfights were messy, chaotic affairs rather than choreographed standoffs. That afternoon, you're invited to the shooting range behind the saloon. It's a rough patch of dirt with wooden targets and a few grizzled men who shoot with casual ease. One of them offers you some advice: don't think about it. Just breathe, aim, and trust your gut. You try again. The revolver kicks hard against your hand, but with each shot, your confidence grows. You even hit a few targets dead center. You can almost imagine yourself as the mysterious stranger who rides into town, gun at the ready. Later, a quirky tip from an old-timer: some cowboys kept a pocket mirror to watch for enemies sneaking up behind them. You try it out, but end up just confusing yourself in the reflection. Despite the dangers, guns were a necessity. They provided protection, a way to hunt, and sometimes a terrible solution to personal disputes. You notice how many people carry them openly, on their hips, slung over their backs, or tucked under their coats. You overhear a debate among townsfolk about the ethics of gunslingers versus lawmen. Some admire the skill and code of the gunslinger, others see them as dangerous outlaws. You realize that the line between hero and villain here is as thin as a trigger finger. By the end of the day, your fingers ache, your ears ring, and your respect for guns, and those who wield them, deepens. You tuck the revolver back into its holster, feeling a strange mixture of power and responsibility. You might never be a legendary marksman, but in this wild, dusty town, just knowing how to hold a gun could be the difference between a restless night and a peaceful one. As the sun dips low and shadows stretch long, you catch yourself glancing around a little more carefully. The West might be wild, but it's also watching. And now, you're watching back. With a gun holstered at your side and Dusty still loyally snorting nearby, you step into the uncertain world of Wild West commerce. Trading here isn't like at your friendly neighborhood grocery store with barcodes and polite cashiers. No, it's a mix of bartering, bluffing, and sometimes just plain luck. You find yourself in the general store, where shelves sag under the weight of everything from canned beans to flintlock pistols. The storekeeper eyes you carefully as you pick up a tin of lard. It's hard to tell if he's sizing you up for a quick sale or a quick escape. You remember that cash is often scarce out here. Gold and silver coins are prized, but trading goods, like tobacco, coffee, or even whiskey, are often accepted in their place. One quirky local quips that in some towns, whiskey was worth more than a year's wages. You figure that makes sense if it's the only way to survive the dry heat and grueling days. The storekeeper explains that prices can change on a whim. Today, a sack of flour might cost $2, tomorrow $5. It all depends on supply, demand, and sometimes the mood of whoever's holding the ledger. You suspect there's a lot of mood pricing going on. Historians still argue whether the economy of these frontier towns was mostly cash-based or barter-driven. Evidence shows both, depending on the town's size and the season. But one thing's clear: survival meant being flexible. You try to buy a few essentials, beans, coffee, a small knife, but the storekeeper insists on seeing your coin first. You dig into your pocket and realize you've been carrying the wrong coins all along. The dusty silver piece you have might be worth a day's wage or a fancy dinner, or just a shiny trinket. You're not quite sure. Outside, a group of cowboys are trading horses. You watch the negotiation, which involves a lot of shouting, horse nicknames you don't understand, and at least one spat of mud. Eventually, a deal is struck, and you wonder if you missed the fine print somewhere. Later, you overhear a bizarre tale about a prospector who tried to pay for supplies using gold dust sealed in a glass vial. The story ends with a broken veil, a very angry storekeeper, and a lot of messy cleanup. You can't decide if it's cautionary or hilarious. Bartering isn't just for goods. Services like blacksmithing, horseshoeing, and even washing clothes come with their own price tags, often settled in a mix of goods and promises. One old rancher tells you that sometimes, a favor done today gets returned in kind years later, if it's remembered at all. In the afternoon, you visit the blacksmith. The heat from the forge is almost unbearable, but the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal is oddly soothing. The blacksmith is an intimidating figure, muscles rippling beneath soot-streaked skin. He smiles once and says, "You pay in whiskey, or you pay in work." You offer a hand at shoeing Dusty. It's messy and smelly, and you nearly get your fingers caught in the process. The blacksmith laughs and says you're going to fit right in. As the day fades, you reflect on the complexity of Wild West trade, an economy built on trust, grit, and sometimes just sheer stubbornness. You realize surviving here isn't just about shooting straight or riding fast. It's about knowing when to hold your cards, and when to fold, and sometimes, it's about knowing who to trust with your next cup of coffee. Morning light spills across the dusty main street, stirring the town awake. Wagons creak as they roll over uneven boards, shopkeepers sweep porches, and a dog barks lazily at nothing in particular. Today, you decide it's time to visit the local doctor, or as they called him back then, the medicine man, though the title feels a little generous given what you've seen so far. Out here, medicine is as much improvisation as science, and every treatment feels like an experiment balanced on the edge of hope. The doctor's office is a squat wooden building with peeling paint, wedged between the barber and the undertaker. It smells like a strange mix of pine resin, tobacco smoke, and something vaguely metallic that clings to the air. Inside, shelves sag beneath bottles filled with cloudy liquids, rolls of linen, and jars stuffed with herbs whose labels have long since faded. An assortment of tools glints dully in the dim light, scalpels, saws, and clamps that look suspiciously like medieval torture devices. You try not to flinch as the doctor, an older man with a kindly face but steely eyes, shows you his tools of the trade. His hands are steady, but you can tell they've seen more than their fair share of suffering. You learn that common ailments here include everything from scorpion stings and rattlesnake bites to broken bones, dysentery, and the occasional gunshot wound. The doctor explains his most reliable remedies: whiskey for pain relief, raw eggs for nearly everything else, and occasionally, a healthy smear of crocodile dung used as makeshift sunscreen. Yes, that's a real thing some pioneers reportedly swore by. You shudder at the thought and quietly resolve never to try it, no matter how hot the sun beats down. Historians still argue whether the medical practices of frontier doctors were acts of heroic ingenuity or just desperation dressed in a white coat. The truth? Often it was a bit of both. In a place where supplies were scarce and proper hospitals were weeks away, you made do with whatever you had, and prayed it was enough. As you stand in the corner, you watch the doctor carefully wrap a man's badly bruised arm with linen strips. The patient winces, his teeth clenched, but then manages a wry grin as he mutters about getting roughed up by a mule. The room fills with a ripple of chuckles, and you realize humor, as fragile as it might be, is one of the most vital medicines here. The doctor tells you stories of epidemics that swept through towns like wildfire. Smallpox, cholera, influenza, sicknesses that could turn thriving communities into ghost towns in a matter of weeks. Quarantines were nearly impossible, with families crammed into one-room cabins and neighbors sharing water sources. And when disease struck, the nearest hospital might be days away by horse. You feel a small surge of gratitude just to be standing here with a bottle of whiskey close at hand, even if it's mostly for medicinal use. One quirky tidbit the doctor shares: many frontier doctors traveled with bottles of snake oil, sold as miracle cures for everything from headaches to heartbreaks. Spoiler: it didn't work. But people bought it anyway, whether from blind hope, desperation, or the simple belief that swallowing something, anything, was better than doing nothing at all. You can almost picture the traveling salesman, voice booming from a wagon, promising miracles in a bottle. When you ask about surgery, the doctor doesn't sugarcoat his answer. He shrugs and says, "You do what you must." Sometimes that meant amputating a limb with nothing more than a saw and a stiff drink for the patient. Anesthesia was a luxury almost no one here had ever seen. Pain was the price of survival, and infection was the true enemy. You imagine the strength it would take to endure such a procedure and the grim resolve required to carry it out. Later, you wander into the apothecary, a dim shop lined with shelves of glass jars filled with herbs, roots, and mysterious powders. The apothecary, a wiry woman with quick eyes, offers to mix you a tonic. She promises it will boost your spirit and steady your hand. You politely decline, secretly glad you didn't grow up with a medicine cabinet full of dubious remedies whose side effects might be worse than the illness. Still, there's a strange charm in the cluttered shelves, as though every jar holds a fragment of forgotten wisdom. As you step outside into the fading afternoon light, you pass by the town's graveyard. Crooked wooden crosses rise from the earth, weathered by sun and wind, each one marking the final resting place of someone who didn't make it. A shiver runs through you, not just from fear but from respect. Life out here was fragile, and every day survived felt like a small miracle. You realize then that surviving the West isn't just about guns, grit, or horses. It's about tending wounds both visible and invisible, about carrying grief while still pushing forward, about finding courage when hope feels as thin as smoke. Out here, people didn't just fight the land or each other, they fought time, disease, and despair. Before you leave, you tuck a small bottle of whiskey into your pocket. Not because you plan to drink it, but because sometimes, just holding a bit of frontier medicine makes you feel a little braver. A reminder that even in the roughest of places, people still found ways to heal, if not always the body, then at least the spirit. You awake with the sun casting long shadows across the dusty streets, the golden light painting everything in shades of copper and amber. The town is stirring, and with it comes the weight of another day's lessons. Today, you've set your mind on learning one of the most important, and most complicated, skills in the Wild West: negotiation. Out here, survival isn't just about who draws fastest or who shoots straightest. Sometimes, it's about who can keep their voice calm, their smile steady, and their mind sharper than the man across the table. Whether you're buying a horse, hiring a hand, or settling a bitter dispute over land, your ability to talk your way through a situation could be as vital as a steady hand on a revolver. You start by heading to the town square. Dust swirls lazily in the morning air, kicked up by boots and hooves. A crowd has gathered, their chatter blending into a restless hum. At the center of it all, standing on a wooden crate like a general before his troops, is the auctioneer. His voice carries with a practiced rhythm, fast, loud, rolling like a drumbeat, and he holds the attention of everyone in earshot. Today's sale is cattle, thick and stubborn beasts that paw the dirt, snort clouds of steam, and look like they'd rather chew through the ropes holding them than stand politely for sale. You watch as the auctioneer's words rise and fall like a roller coaster, driving up prices with carefully timed pauses. Quick gestures, and a wink here or there. His patter is half song, half strategy, and before long you see how easily he stirs the crowd into competition. Bids fire off like bullets, each rancher trying to outdo the next, until the numbers climb beyond what you thought anyone would pay. Curiosity nudges you forward, and you raise your hand to try your luck at bidding. Almost immediately, you realize you're outmatched. The seasoned ranchers toss around numbers and jargon like playing cards, smooth and sure, while you stumble over your words. Your rookie mistakes earn you a few raised eyebrows, and even a chuckle or two muffled behind calloused hands. Heat creeps up your neck, but you remind yourself, everyone starts somewhere. Here, negotiation isn't just about haggling over coins and cattle. It's about reading the room, watching the way a man sets his jaw, or the way a woman narrows her eyes before countering. It's knowing when to push forward, when to ease back. And when to swallow your pride and walk away before you lose more than your money. You overhear a heated argument nearby about water rights, a reminder that out here, control over resources could mean the difference between prosperity and starvation. Negotiation, you realize, can be as sharp and dangerous as any blade. Historians still argue whether the famous showdowns of the Wild West, the ones immortalized in dime novels and painted on the silver screen, were really about fists and bullets, or whether they were, more often than not, settled in backrooms with hushed voices, handshakes, and clever compromise. The truth? Both played a role, depending on the temper and patience of those involved. Sometimes words bought peace, sometimes pride demanded blood. Later, you strike up a conversation with a local trader, a wiry man with sun-baked skin and eyes that never stop moving. He leans close and shares an unusual piece of advice: if you can make M laugh, you can make M buy. At first, it sounds like simple humor, but the more you think about it, the more you see the sharper edge beneath. Charm, wit, a well-timed joke, these are weapons in their own right, disarming the wary and coaxing open the cautious. Negotiation, you realize, isn't just a science. It's theater. You put the advice to the test, practicing with a few townsfolk as you move between stalls. You bargain for supplies, trade small talk, and even attempt a joke or two. The results aren't perfect, you're no silver-tongued salesman, but your effort earns you a few patient smiles and, once, a modest discount on a sack of flour. Progress, however small, still counts out here. As the day stretches on, you begin to recognize the unspoken rules that guide every exchange. Never show desperation, no matter how badly you need something. Always give respect, even when you're pushing hard for a better deal. And above all, never insult the price outright until you've done your homework. One wrong word, one careless slight, and a negotiation can sour into a grudge, or worse, a fight faster than you can say six-shooter. That evening, the town gathers in the meeting hall, a squat, drafty building with creaking benches and lanterns that sputter against the night air. Here, disputes are settled and deals struck under the watchful gaze of neighbors and rivals alike. The atmosphere is tense but surprisingly civil, a reminder that even in the Wild West, communities depended on cooperation as much as competition. You watch as tempers flare and cool in rapid succession, as voices rise in anger only to be soothed by calmer words. It feels less like chaos and more like a delicate balancing act. A dance where everyone knows the steps but few can perform them well. As the meeting adjourns, an old rancher with a face carved by sun and wind pulls you aside. His voice is quiet, but his words carry weight. Sometimes, he says, the best negotiation is knowing when to say nothing at all. Silence, wielded wisely, can force the other side to fill the void, often revealing more than they meant to. You tuck that advice away, feeling instinctively that it may serve you well in the days to come. Negotiation isn't just a skill, it's a survival tool. Out here, knowing how to talk can keep you alive just as surely as knowing how to ride, shoot, or fight. It's the difference between gaining a friend and making an enemy, between walking away with your pockets full or empty. As you step back into the cool night air and return to your room, tired but thoughtful, you realize something: maybe, just maybe, you're starting to get the hang of this. The West is teaching you in its own rough, relentless way. And while words might not stop bullets, they can shape the ground you stand on, and sometimes, that's enough. You wake to a day that smells like sweat, sagebrush, and a hint of trouble. Today, it's time to explore the darker side of the Wild West, the notorious outlaws and bandits who made this land as dangerous as it was thrilling. You probably won't survive if you cross paths with one, but knowing how they operate might just keep you one step ahead. As you walk toward the outskirts of town, you hear whispered stories of infamous figures: Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and lesser-known desperados who made a habit of robbing stagecoaches, banks, and unwary travelers. The air practically crackles with the legends they left behind, whether true or exaggerated. You visit a rundown tavern, where an old man with a crooked smile recounts a tale about a gang that once robbed the town's bank blind, escaping through a hidden tunnel no one else knew about. You wonder how many of these stories are truth, and how many are just the stuff of tall tales spun by folks craving a little excitement. Historians still argue whether the Wild West was truly lawless chaos or if most of the crime was exaggerated by dime novels and eager reporters. The reality? Outlaws existed, but everyday life was mostly about hard work and survival. You find yourself imagining the lives of these bandits, desperate, cunning, and always on the run. You picture the adrenaline of a midnight raid, the roar of gunfire, and the inevitable chase across rugged terrain. It's thrilling and terrifying all at once. One quirky fact: some outlaws disguise themselves as respectable citizens. Shopkeepers, farmers, even lawmen. Trust no one, especially if their smile seems too practiced. As you return to town, you notice posters plastered on walls, wanted signs featuring grainy portraits and hefty rewards. You realize these posters were both warnings and invitations, daring anyone brave enough to capture or kill the outlaws for a fortune. You meet a bounty hunter who shares his code: "I don't hunt men, I hunt the stories that keep the peace." His eyes gleam with a mix of pride and regret. You get the feeling that life chasing outlaws is a lonely one. Back at the saloon, conversations turn to the impact of these criminals. They were villains to some, heroes to others, especially when outlaws stole from corrupt officials or cruel ranchers. The line between right and wrong blurs under the desert sun. You wonder if the Wild West stories you grew up with missed the messy truths behind the myth, the fear, the desperation, the fleeting moments of mercy. It's a land of contradictions, where the outlaw and the lawman are sometimes two sides of the same tarnished coin. As night falls, you feel a chill, not just from the dropping temperature, but from the weight of the history wrapped up in this wild land. You tuck your coat tighter and remind yourself, respect the outlaws, but don't become one. You close your eyes, ready for whatever tomorrow's dusty roads bring. The next morning, you step into a world where the West's promise of freedom and opportunity comes face to face with its harsh realities: life on a cattle drive. You've heard stories of these epic journeys, long, grueling treks across hundreds of miles of unforgiving terrain, with nothing but your wits, your horse, and 1,000 head of cattle between you and disaster. You join a crew of cowboys preparing to move a herd. The camp buzzes with activity, men checking ropes, horses being saddled, and the distant lowing of cattle. The air smells of dust, sweat, and campfire smoke. You quickly learn that this isn't some leisurely ride, it's survival on the move. Your job is simple: help keep the herd together. Watch for strays, and maybe fend off rustlers. Sounds easy until you realize cattle have minds of their own, and a stampede can start with the slightest noise or movement. You learn to read the animals, to sense their moods, and to stay calm when chaos erupts. One cowboy tells you that cowboys used to wear chaps, not just for fashion, but to protect their legs from brush, snakes, and the occasional disgruntled cow. You take a pair and realize that, despite their rugged look, they're surprisingly comfortable. Historians still argue how much the image of the cowboy was shaped by fact versus fiction. Some say the romantic cowboy was more a creation of Hollywood than history. But the truth? The real cowboys were tough, resourceful, and often more concerned with their cattle than any sort of drama. Days pass as you ride alongside the herd, the landscape shifting from dusty plains to rocky canyons. Nights are cold, and the campfire becomes a place for stories, laughter, and the occasional tense silence. You start to appreciate the camaraderie that develops when you're living on the edge. You hear tales of cattle drives lasting months, crossing dangerous rivers, and dodging hostile territories. One cowboy mentions a drive where they lost half the herd to disease and drought, a reminder that nature was often the harshest adversary. A quirky bit of trivia you pick up: some cowboys carried firebrands to help steer the herd at night. It sounds like a recipe for disaster, but it worked well enough to keep the cattle moving. By the end of the drive, you're exhausted, sunburned, and dirtier than you ever thought possible. But there's a quiet pride in having survived it, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, you're becoming part of this wild land story. You realize that cattle drives were more than work, they were a way of life, shaping the West's economy, culture, and myths. As you settle into camp one last time, the stars blazing overhead, you think about how far you've come, and how much further there is to go. The early morning chill wraps around you as you mount your horse and prepare to explore the darker corners of the Wild West's justice system, the infamous frontier lawmen. These were the men, and sometimes women, tasked with keeping order in a land where rules often felt optional. You make your way to the sheriff's office, where the current sheriff, a grizzled veteran with a permanent scowl and a badge worn thin by years of use, greets you. He offers a tired smile and tells you straight, out here, justice isn't always about right or wrong. It's about keeping the peace, by any means necessary. You follow him through the daily grind, arresting drunks, breaking up fights, and occasionally escorting less fortunate souls to a rough and ready jail cell. The jail is nothing more than a few wooden planks and iron bars, but it holds a surprising number of characters, some innocent, others less so. One peculiar detail: the sheriff keeps a book filled with hand-drawn wanted posters, some looking more like caricatures than accurate portraits. Artistic license, he jokes, but you wonder how many of those faces are familiar to the townsfolk. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of frontier lawmen. Were they heroic keepers of order, or just rough men wielding power with little oversight? The truth lies somewhere in between, shaded by the blurred lines of survival and justice. You witness a town meeting where the sheriff settles a land dispute with a mix of stern words and even sterner looks. It's clear that sometimes the law is less about paperwork and more about who's got the biggest gun and the steadiest aim. Later, the sheriff confides in you about the personal toll of his job, the loneliness, the constant threat of violence, and the weight of decisions that could mean life or death. You see a man who's tired, but determined to keep his town from descending into chaos. You learn about the posse system, where ordinary citizens band together to hunt down criminals. It sounds noble, but you hear stories of mistaken identity and vigilante justice gone wrong, reminders that frontier law was often a messy business. One quirky fact: some sheriffs wore badges made from Mexican silver coins or other local treasures. They were as much symbols of respect as they were badges of authority. By evening, you watch the sheriff clean his pistol by the light of a flickering lantern. You realize that out here, the line between lawman and outlaw can be thinner than a whisper on the wind. As night falls, you think about the burden of upholding justice in a land that often feels like it's teetering on the edge of anarchy, and how every small act of order counts. The sun climbs slowly as you make your way toward the local saloon, the heart of social life and the unofficial courtroom of rumors and stories. Here, survival depends not just on grit or gunpowder, but on knowing the right people, reading the room, and sometimes just having a good poker face. You push through swinging doors to find a haze of smoke, laughter, and the occasional clatter of poker chips. The air smells like whiskey, sweat, and something faintly sweet, maybe spilled sarsaparilla. You spot a group gathered around a table playing poker, eyes sharp, hands twitchy. Card sharks in the Wild West are a breed of their own. You take a seat, trying to look confident, but quickly realize that bluffing here isn't just a game. It's a survival skill. The stakes aren't just money, they're reputation, respect, and sometimes, your life. A bartender with a knowing smile pours you a glass of whiskey and tells you, in this town, a good poker face can win you a fortune, or get you killed. You sip cautiously, the warm burn doing little to calm your nerves. Historians still argue how much poker and other gambling games shaped the social dynamics of frontier towns. Was it just entertainment, or a way to settle disputes and measure trust? Either way, the games were never just about luck. You watch a particularly tense hand, where two men lock eyes over the table, neither willing to fold. The tension is palpable, broken only when one finally lays down a winning flush with a triumphant grin. The loser grumbles but tips his hat, a gesture of respect in a rough world. Outside, you overhear tales of cheating scandals, outlaw gamblers, and infamous saloon brawls that started over a bad hand and ended with broken furniture and bruised egos. One quirky story involves a gambler who once hid cards up his sleeve, literally, causing quite the scandal when discovered. You try your luck, holding cards that seem more like random shapes than a winning hand. You lose your first few rounds but gain valuable lessons. Never show your desperation, watch your opponents carefully, and don't let your excitement give you away. The saloon is also a hub for news, where you learn about the latest wagon trains, lawmen on the hunt, and rumors of gold strikes far to the north. It's a reminder that the Wild West is a patchwork of stories, some true, some embellished, all part of the ever-shifting landscape. As the evening wears on, a fiddle starts playing, and the saloon fills with music and laughter. You realize that despite the danger and hardship, this place pulses with life and resilience. You raise your glass to the room, feeling a little more at home in this chaotic, dusty world. Maybe, you think, you could learn to play this game after all. The next morning greets you with a breeze that carries the scent of pine and distant rain, a rare promise of relief in the arid West. Today, your journey takes you into the less glamorous, yet equally vital, world of the railroad builders, the unsung heroes who stitched the vast frontier together with steel rails. You find yourself at a sprawling construction camp, where hundreds of workers, known as section hands, labor tirelessly to lay track across rocky terrain and sweeping plains. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and the clatter of hammers striking spikes into wooden ties. The foreman, a burly man with a thick beard and an even thicker accent, explains the process, blasting through rock, grading the earth, and inching forward one rail at a time. It's back-breaking work, but without the railroad, the West would have remained an isolated wilderness. You learn that the Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, was a monumental achievement that shrank months of travel to days. It fueled growth, migration, and trade, but also sparked conflicts with Native American tribes whose lands were being carved up without consent. Historians still argue whether the railroad was a symbol of progress or a catalyst for displacement and environmental change. The truth is complicated, reflecting both hope and hardship. One quirky tidbit you pick up: some workers reportedly used nitroglycerin to blast rock. A practice as dangerous as it sounds, leading to frequent accidents and explosive surprises. You watch as workers chant a rhythmic song to keep pace while hammering spikes, a tradition that built camaraderie amid grueling conditions. You try joining in but quickly give up, not quite hitting the right notes. Lunch is a simple affair: hardtack, beans, and strong coffee served around campfires. The workers joke about their missing teeth and swollen ankles, sharing stories that range from heroic to hilarious. You also notice the diversity among the laborers, immigrants from China, Ireland, and other lands, each bringing unique skills and facing their own challenges. Some endured discrimination and harsh conditions, but their contributions were crucial. As the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the tracks, you reflect on how the railroad transformed the West. It was more than steel and sweat, it was a lifeline that reshaped economies, cultures, and dreams. You realize that surviving the Wild West meant understanding its changing landscape, and riding the rails was one way to keep pace. With the whistle of a distant train echoing through the valley, you feel a pulse of excitement mixed with melancholy, a reminder that progress often comes with a cost. You settle down beside the tracks, letting the steady rhythm of the rails lull you into a thoughtful calm. The dawn breaks with a soft golden haze, and you find yourself drawn to the quieter, often overlooked, lives of women in the Wild West. You might think the West was all rough and tumble men with guns and hats, but women played crucial roles, sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes front and center. You visit a small homestead where a woman named Mary tends a thriving vegetable garden and churns butter with practiced ease. She welcomes you with a warm smile and a slice of freshly baked cornbread, the scent of which instantly transports you away from dusty trails and saloons. Mary explains that women here were not just homemakers, they were doctors, teachers, business owners, and sometimes even law enforcers. Their strength was often quiet but no less fierce. You hear about women who ran boarding houses, served as midwives delivering babies without fancy equipment, and even rode shotgun on stagecoaches to protect valuable cargo. Some, like the famous Calamity Jane, blurred the lines of traditional gender roles with daring exploits and legendary toughness. Historians still argue how much influence women really held in these frontier communities, but there's no doubt they shaped the social fabric in profound ways. One quirky fact: frontier women often used crocodile dung as sunscreen and skin treatment. Yes, that same quirky tidbit you remember from the doctor's office back in Section 8. It's a reminder that some remedies, however bizarre, had staying power. You learn about the suffrage movement starting to ripple even in these rugged lands, with women organizing for the right to vote and own property, a battle that often met with skepticism or outright hostility. Mary shares stories of daily life, long days filled with hard labor, tending livestock, mending clothes, and keeping the household running. You admire the resilience it takes to juggle so many roles without the conveniences we take for granted. You also hear about the social events that broke the monotony: barn dances, quilting bees, and church gatherings where stories and news spread faster than the prairie fire. As you leave the homestead, you feel a new appreciation for the women who kept the wheels turning in this harsh land. Their stories might not always be loud, but their impact echoes through history. The Wild West was a place of contradictions and surprises, and the women you met today are proof that strength comes in many forms. You mount your horse, thinking about how the West story isn't complete without them. You awake to a still, quiet morning, feeling the weight of your journey through this wild and restless land. Today, you confront the final piece of the puzzle: how the Wild West's myths grew into legends that shaped America's imagination, and how those legends sometimes clash with the real, messy history beneath. You stroll through the town's dusty streets one last time, noticing how every building, every face, seems to carry a story. The gunfighter who turned into a folk hero, the lawman whose badge was tarnished by corruption, the saloon girl with a secret past, all threads woven into the vast tapestry of myth and reality. You hear a local storyteller weaving tales of heroism and heartbreak, his voice rising and falling like a song. He tells of the Lone Ranger, the outlaw with a heart of gold, and the cattle drives that became epic adventures in children's books. You can't help but smile. These stories gave the West its larger-than-life spirit. Historians still argue about how much these myths obscure the true history, sometimes romanticizing violence or overlooking the experiences of Native Americans, immigrants, and women. The truth is complex, layered with voices often drowned out by louder legends. You remember your lessons, the negotiation tactics that saved lives, the grim realities of outlaw life, the grueling cattle drives, the relentless railroad work, and the quiet power of frontier women. Each chapter adds depth to the simple stories told around campfires. One quirky tidbit you recall is that many early Western films were shot in California deserts, far from the actual places where these events happened. Hollywood shaped a vision that, while iconic, wasn't always historically accurate. You reflect on how these myths, though sometimes flawed, helped build a national identity rooted in rugged individualism, freedom, and adventure, a story that still resonates today. As the sun sets behind the hills, you feel a gentle calm settle over you. The Wild West isn't just a place or a time, it's a collection of stories, both true and imagined, that remind us of resilience, hope, and the messy beauty of human nature. You take a deep breath, feeling the dust of the past settle softly around you, and know that while you probably wouldn't survive this land for long, you've at least learned how to live with its stories. You walk back to your room, ready to rest, carrying a piece of the West in your heart. Now, slow the pace. The sky darkens gently outside your window, a soft hush falling over the land you've come to know. The memories of dusty trails and rattling train tracks fade into a gentle whisper. You feel the warmth of the day linger in your bones, settling like a comforting blanket. Each breath you take is slower now, softer, as if the very air invites you to rest. Imagine the vastness of the West stretching out beneath a velvet night sky, stars blinking quietly, watching over the endless plains. The wild energy you felt today eases away, replaced by a calm so deep it feels like it might wrap around you, pulling you softly into sleep. Know that these stories, the hard truths and the tall tales, are tucked safely away, waiting for the next time you wander these dusty roads in your dreams. Until then, rest easy. The West may be wild, but here, in this quiet moment, you are safe. Good night, traveler.